Okay, so where are we up to in the story? We're up to the first. Just to review very quickly, the first story. It seems that that we keep mentioning the first song. The young woman is very anxious. She's full of love, and she's thinking about, a home and furniture, and she wants to know where he is, and he is much more reluctant. He doesn't really tell her where he is. He's willing to praise her, but in a much more measured way than the way she addresses him. Then you have a switch, beginning of middle of chapter 2. You have a switch. All of a sudden, now she's describing how her beloved, the man, is very anxious, skipping over the hills to come to her, and very excited, very anxious, very I don't know, anxious is the right word. Very excited, very passionate. And at this time around, she is much more reluctant. And basically, she tells him, as we read last time, basically she says, "Come back later. Come back later in the day. I'm too busy now." And this gets us to chapter 3. What happens in chapter 3 is that he never comes back. So if she expected him to come back in the afternoon because that's when she had time in her calendar, he never shows up. And therefore, the chapter 3 opens up, this scene opens up, and she's lying in bed alone and yearning for the person who she says, "For that which my soul loved." And she can't, and she's alone. So what does she do? She does something that is unheard of in the ancient world. She goes outside at night to go look for him. Now today you have you have electricity. You can go out. You have a flashlight. Back then, the night was not the time to go searching. The opposite, night is when people stayed put where they were. But she's searching because the yearning and the longing becomes too powerful at night. And what happens? What happens is that she finds the guards. Who are the guards? She finds the guards of the city, and she asks them, "Can you help me find? Have you seen the one that my soul loved?" And eventually, the guards are of no help. But as she turns away from the guards, all of a sudden, she says she finds him. And she finds him, she grasps him, she doesn't let go. Where does she take him? So here, the shift is, you would expect her to take him to her home, her bedroom. No, she takes him to her mother's home. In other words, the place where she grew up. This may or may not have significance, but that's the story. And that's the passage we're going to try to think about today. And of course, it's not the full chapter 3. The second half of the chapter shifts, but that's the beginning of chapter 3. So I think we should read it inside. And then, as is our custom, we want to look at the various interpretations, the pshat, the simple level, and then the historical, and then the Kabbalistic. So just to turn back a second, just to see the beauty, just to remind ourselves of the last verse, previous chapter, the last verse was, she tells him, "Until the sun spreads and the shadows flee, go around, liken yourself, my beloved, to a gazelle or to a fawn of the hinds on distant mountains. Go away, go to distant mountains, come back later, come back in the afternoon, when the sun spreads and the shadows flee." And like I said, the transition here is not perfect. All of a sudden, we find her alone on my bed at night. Okay, this is interesting. Balelot, at nights, in the plural. This is interesting. So in other words, it doesn't necessarily mean it happened that same night, but in general, okay. On my bed at nights, I sought him whom my soul loves. I sought him, but I did not find him. I will arise now and go around the city, in the marketplaces and in the city squares. I will seek him whom my soul loves. I sought him, but I did not find him. The watchman who patrolled the city found me. Have you seen whom my soul loves? She asks the watchman. I had just passed them by when I found him whom my soul loves. I held him and would not let him go, and would not let him go, until I brought him into my mother's house and into the chamber of her who had conceived me. Same idea. And now we have again verse 5, which is the same verse that we had earlier at the end of the first song, at the middle of chapter 2. I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles or by the hinds of the field, that you neither awaken nor arouse the love until it is desirous. So there's a theory that says, even though, like I said, the breaking of the chapters the chapters stop in different places, but it's not necessarily where the chapters were not divided by the Jewish sages, and therefore it's not necessarily accurate. So there's a theory that says that what breaks the song is this verse. In other words, if we're following the way we're reading it, that the first song is where she is more anxious and he is not, and then she takes the message to heart and she basically says it's not going to work because you can't awaken the love too early if the other person is not ready, right? That's what we said in verse 5 in chapter 2. She was saying, I am lovesick, and she wants his embrace. And then verse 7 of chapter 2, she says this verse, same exact verse, I adjure your daughters of Jerusalem, etc., that you neither awaken nor arouse the love until it is desirous. Don't awaken the love prematurely. It takes time to develop. So that would be the end of the first song, the way we're reading it. And therefore, that same verse, this verse is the verse that stops the second song. And the second song would be, the second song ends. What's the takeaway of the second song? It's the same story. The same story, it's that, again, the same frustration that in this song, when he was looking for her, when he came to her, she was not ready. When she's looking for him, after she sends him away, when she's looking for him, apparently it takes a lot of work, a lot of searching. It says, how many times did it say the words, I sought him, bikashti, I sought him. 1, 2, avaksha, 3, 4, and how many times did it say the one that my soul loves? So obviously at this point, when she is very in love with him, it takes a lot of work. He's not really available. So some people would believe that verse 5 is the end. And then verse 6, we'll get to that next time. Verse 6 begins the wedding. And it talks about how she approaches to the wedding and how he approaches the wedding. And that's another story. That's another unit. We'll discuss that next time, God willing. Probably not next week, because I just found out that my sister, who has 2 girls, just had a boy today. So I assume that the bris will be on Friday. So we'll see what happens. But in any case, the next time we'll study the wedding. I think so. I think the next time we'll study the wedding. Okay. So that is the pshat. That's the basic level. You get the story. She says, come back later. He doesn't call back. She's stuck at night alone. She has to look for him. She asks the guards to help her. The guards are of no help. She turns away from the guards, boom, and she happens to find him. It's almost like a chance encounter. She finds him. She grabs him. If she grabs him, it sounds like, I don't know that I don't know that he wants to be here as much as she does, right? Those words, I held him. Let's see. Achaztiv, I held him and I would not let him go. Achaztiv is the grasp. It's more than holding, I think. And just you have to hold on to him, because if not, he's fleeting. Now, what does that mean in the simple song? In the simple song means I don't know if he's ready. In the spiritual song, we'll have to see what that means. Go ahead, Bob. I think you're on silent, but your hand is up. Bob, I hope you're not talking because we cannot hear you, but your hand is up. Either way, please don't hesitate to jump in and ask any question.
So is the guards like, I don't remember which Haftarah it was you were talking about that, I think it was Haftarah, that the Jewish people trusted in other nations to protect them instead of God. And then that led to their downfall because they were trusting in others.
So I'm hesitant to answer that question because it depends which dimension you're going to talk about. And in the level of the historical perspective, it's going to be very different than the Kabbalistic perspective.
Right.
So I don't want to address it. I do want to say that the guards appear later as well in the same chapter. So I'm jumping ahead, but if you see here, the the watchmen who patrol the city found me. They appear at least two other times. They appear later in this chapter when he discusses the bed of Solomon. In other words, talks about Solomon's palace and how he slept at night. Remember, it's an interesting contrast. In verse 1, we talk about how she is lying in bed alone. How does Solomon lie in bed? There's a beautiful verse 7. We have to figure out what the context is, but I don't want to get into it. I just want to mention the word, not the word, but the concept of guards. Behold, the litter of Solomon, the bed, mitato, his bed. 60 mighty men are around it, of the mighty men of Israel. They all hold the sword, skilled in warfare. Each one his sword is on his thigh because of the fear at night. So you have 60 guards surrounding Solomon. So it's another place where the guards appear. Now, who are the guards? Are they protecting Solomon? Are they protecting peace in the city? Right. So if the person she loves is Solomon, that's probably the answer. If the person she loves is Solomon, then it makes sense that the guards would know where the king is. You bump into the Secret Service and you say, "Where's the president?" Doesn't mean they're going to tell you, but it's logical to ask them. Right? Now, the guards don't necessarily want this meeting. Don't want the king to meet this anonymous girl who no one knows who she is. So it's not surprising that the guards don't tell her where the king is. Okay? That's one point. Another point you could look at it in the level of pshat. We'll get to the level of historical, the Chazal, the sages, and the Kabbalah later. Level of pshat, you can also say that the guard is looking for, the idea of the guard is to keep peace in the city. At night, someone running around searching for someone else, it's a very uncommon time to be looking for people, right? In those days, like I said, no electricity. At night, people are going outside and looking for trouble. So the guards are here to sort of create order. This person, because of the love, she's doing something that is out of the ordinary. And the guards would be offended by that. And maybe the message is, for love, sometimes you have to do things that are not logical, right? And maybe that will apply in the spiritual interpretation as well. But I want to say one more thing about the guards is that later, after the wedding, there's a crisis. After the crisis, she goes out looking for him again. And this time, the guards, not only do they not help, but they actually harm her and they beat her. And we'll get to that later. So the guards it's a good question who the guards are, because they keep reappearing. And I'm not saying they always mean the same thing, but they are significant. They are an important part of the plot. At some point, we're gonna run into them and figure out, we're gonna have to address who are these guards exactly. Okay, I hope I didn't confuse just by adding more information, but I just want to give you a little more of a full picture here.
What does that Rashi mean in verse 3? That have you seen whom my soul loves? And he interprets it as, what did you find in his mouth?
Okay, so my guess is, let's start from, let's open the Rashis. Let's do all the Rashis. In short, what are we going to say? We have to start from the beginning. Last chapter, right? Okay, I'll give you a chazara, a repetition. Last week we said that the woman tells the guy, go come back in the afternoon. How did Rashi say? Rashi said what that meant was that by the Jewish people, God came to the Jewish people, took them out of Egypt, asked them to call him by the sea. In other words, he wanted to hear their voice at the sea, and that's where they cried out to him. Maybe that's where they sang the song of the sea as well. In any case, God is coming and showing his love. The people cause God to flee. They say, go away, go take a hike, go to the mountains of separation. Rashi said that was through the sin of the egel, the sin of the calf, and also the sin of the spies. Now, so therefore, continuing upon that metaphor, continuing upon that storyline, the historical line of that when the Jewish people tell God, take a hike, what they're really saying is, by the sins of the desert, the first year in the desert, they push God away. So now lying in bed alone, says Rashi, that refers to the next 38 years in the desert. We say 38 years because year 1 was the year of the sins, really, till they got the Torah, till the spies unfolded. It took many months. And then year 40 was already the reconciliation, as we will speak later. But so the time that God was upset at the Jewish people, so to speak, in other words, even when after they sinned, he forgave them means he didn't kill them. but there was still tension in the air. The love was not restored. And that's why even if you read Rashi, Rashi says that when it comes to the fourth book, I believe it's in the fourth book, Rashi says that in Hebrew there's two words. There's vayomer, which is an expression of softness, and there's vayedaber, which is expression of harsh. So there's two words for spoke, and God spoke. There's vayomer Hashem and vayedaber Hashem. So why are there two words? Because there's a subtlety. What's the subtlety? The subtlety is that vayomer means God speaks words of soft words, and vayedaber is harsh words. And then Rashi says, if you look, the 38 years that the Jewish people were in the desert, they were like nizufim. Nizufim means God was angry at them. Those 38 years, it does not say vayomer. It only says vayedaber. God spoke harshly. After the 39th year, in the 40th year, all of a sudden the Torah says vayomer again, because now so the reconciliation happened. So it's very interesting. So here again, so we're going back to the image of the woman is lying in bed alone after she told her guy to leave and not come back later. He never came back. So she's sitting alone, says Rashi, on my bed at night. When I was troubled, when I sat in the dark for the entire 38 years that the Israelites were under reproach. So that's when she's alone. I sought him, but I did not find him. What does it mean that the Jews sought God and God, they could not find God? So these are the verses. Rashi quotes the verses in Exodus, for I shall not go up in your midst after the sin of the golden calf. God says, Lo elebekir b'cha. I'm not going to go with you. I'm not going to be in your camp. That means they sought God. God doesn't want to show up. And Deuteronomy, for I am not in your midst. So basically they're alone. To the Jewish people, 38 years, God is not in their midst. So what are they looking? They're searching for God. Who are they searching for God? Who do they speak? The guards. Who are the guards? The guards are the guards of the palace. So they sort of, at least according to Rashi, in this way, they're guarding the palace and they are guarding, protecting God. So they work for God. They're on God's payroll. So who are the guards that will help us find God? Moses and Aaron. So let's continue. I arise now and I will seek. And Moses prayed, I will go up to the Lord. Okay, so what does it mean that the Jews sought God? It means Moshe asks God for forgiveness. All those 38 years, Moshe is asking God for forgiveness. What happens? The watchmen who patrol the city found me. Who's the watchmen who patrol the city? Moses and Aaron. And then we ask Moses and Aaron, have you seen whom my soul loves? We ask the guards, we ask Moshe and Aaron, do you know what God is? What does it mean? We're asking, do you know what God is? So here's what Elisa mentioned. Rashi says, what did you find in his mouth? In other words, what words, what message do you have from Hashem for the Jewish people? And that's what the Jewish people are saying. We're searching for God. Where can we find God? What's God's message? And that means those 38 years when the Jewish people were in the desert studying Torah from the mouth of Moses and Aaron, it's not just they wanted knowledge. We want to know what to do if my ox gores your donkey. No, we want closeness to God. We want intimacy with God. So asking Moses and Aaron, have you seen God? Tell me, what's God's message? What's the Torah? What is God's words? Now, Moses and Aaron, interestingly, they taught us Torah, but that's not when the reconciliation happened. The reconciliation happened not in Moses and Aaron's lifetime, which is part of the tragedy. When did the reconciliation happen? After Moses and Aaron pass away, when God brings the Jewish people into the land of Israel with great miracles and helps them conquer the land. That is the sign that God is now with them. Okay, so that's why in the story it says, verse 4, I had just passed them by. It means I just passed them by, meaning we're no longer with Moses and Aaron, and that's when I found him. That's the tragedy, that Moshe and Aaron, the tragedy. That's the story. The story is that only when Moshe and Aaron leave do we find the reconciliation, do we see that God loves the Jewish people again by bringing us into Israel. So let's read verse 4. I had just passed them shortly before their separation from me at the end of the 40 years, right? Because if you want to think about it, the miracles began to happen again at the end of the 40 years when the Jewish people conquered the lands east of the Jordan, right? That was the tipping point. At that point, God now is completely reconciled with the Jewish people. So I had just passed them is not the perfect translation. Kim'at she'avarti mehem. Almost I passed them. It could mean almost a little bit before. It could mean a little bit after, right? I would even think that probably the more simple way to read it is a little bit before. So that's how Rashi reads it. Rashi says, right before I left the guards, when Moshe and Aaron were in the last few months of life, that's when the reconciliations began. And then when I found them, when I found that he was with me in the days of Joshua to vanquish the 31 kings. So what does it mean that we found God? It means we were in the times of Joshua, we realized God is with us. God is with us because he helped us conquer the land of Israel. Now, what does it mean? I grasp him and I do not let him go because God is fleeting. In other words, it's not just God is with us, but we're holding on to him. We're taking an action. We're doing something to hold on to God. What did we do? Says Rashi, I held him and would not let him go. I did not loosen my grasp from him until I brought him to the tabernacle of Shiloh because of all that he had done for me. So we know in the Jewish people, when they came into Israel, there were a few places where the Mishkan was. There was Nov, there was Givon, there were other places, but Shiloh was the most prominent of them. Shiloh was where the temple stood there for a very long time, 369 years. That's a chunk of time. And so the Rashi is saying, Rashi's reading the historical perspective. I grab him, I don't let go. I built him the house of Shiloh. I built for him the tabernacle of Shiloh. Now, I mentioned earlier when I said the first time that because the girl was so in love looking for her beloved, you would expect when she finally finds him that there will be a moment of intimacy. You would expect her to take her to her own home. She doesn't. She takes him to her mother's home. Okay? Why? I don't know. There's all kinds of theories. I could say theories from today to tomorrow. But what I do want to say, it's possible it's because we're saving the intimacy for later. Because the Mishkan of Shiloh, the tabernacle of Shiloh, even though of course, it's closeness to God, but it's not the closeness of God in the level, the way it was in the temple of Jerusalem. So if you see that, if you believe like that the song is chronological, it doesn't necessarily have to be, but it seems like Rashi wants to make it as in order as much as consistent with the chronology of Jewish history. Then you would say at Shiloh, there's no intimacy yet, there's no marriage yet. That's still before the wedding. But still, I take him home. How do you know somebody's serious about the relationship? When they take you home, when they take you to visit their parents, right? Then you're serious. So that's what she says. She says, I took, in the simple story, I brought him, I did not let go in verse 4 until I brought him to my mother's house and into the chamber of her who had conceived me. So you bring the guy you love to your mother's house. It's already a deeper stage in the relationship. It means I'm not letting go of you. But it's clear that there's no full intimacy. It's not your own room. And I think that's why Rashi says that it's the temple of Shiloh. God helped us. God is with us. God is taking us into Israel. He's helping us conquer the 31 kings, but we still have to hold on to him. How do we hold on to him? We hold on to him by serving him as represented in the tabernacle of Shiloh, in the Mishkan of Shiloh. So I think this is absolutely beautiful. Even if we would stop here, it would be beautiful. Luckily, we also have the Kabbalistic interpretation to enjoy. L'chaim. Cheers. I just want to say one thing for entertainment. We talk about the mother's house. Later in the chapter, next time we study, we're going to read about the wedding, and it's a very surprising verse. We talk about Solomon, and we talk about Solomon's guards, and it's unbelievable how mighty Solomon is. And then, how does the verse conclude? Go out, O daughters of Zion, and gaze upon King Solomon, upon the crown which his mother crowned him on the day of his nuptials and on the day of the joy of his heart. On his wedding, we come to King Solomon. He's got all the wealth. He's got all the power. We talked about his beauty, his greatness earlier in the verses. And what do we sing? What should the daughters of Jerusalem look at? The crown that his mother made for him. Okay? So in other words, we're going back to the mother, which is very interesting because she brings him to her mother's house. And that's not as surprising as the king. The daughters of Jerusalem understand that if you really want to understand Solomon, don't look at his army. Don't look at his wealth. Go look at what his mother did for him. So both in the beginning of the chapter and the end of the chapter, you have a mention of the mother. And it could be that this is how modern scholars want to read this. It could be that it's really telling you, if you really want to understand somebody, if you really want to know somebody, you have to go back to their childhood. You have to go back to their past. You have to go back to the place where they grew up. because a lot of times people are running away from where they grew up for various reasons. But the place of your parenthood, your parents really have a deep impact in your life. And part of intimacy, part of exposing yourself to the other person, part of opening yourself up to the other person is letting them into your relationship with your parents and let them understand it. And if that's the way you read it, it's fascinating that she brings him to her mother's home. And on the day of the wedding, what are we talking about, Solomon? What's the sort of the epitome? After we describe all of Solomon's greatness, we say, oh, the crown. Crown is sort of the symbol of all the king's might. Who made the crown? It was the mother. Now that's going to open up another whole discussion, because when we come to the Kabbalistic interpretation, who's God's mother? Okay, we're not. Other faiths say God had a mother, but we don't think God had a mother. So we'll have to deal with that later. But it's just interesting to talk about the motherhood and to see how it applies both to her and to him. I thought that was interesting. Okay, it all makes sense. So we're going to look at the Kabbalistic interpretation. Just trying to think if I should close the Rashis. Let's close the Rashis, because the Rashis are going to distract us now. And I want to make sure I don't forget anything. Okay, some of the things that we're going to discuss. She finds God outside. That's very interesting, right? So again, it's the relationship between the soul and God. You find God outside. Outside is not a place where you would expect to find God. Inside represents, we discussed last week, that inside you have the domain of the singular. The domain of the singular is a place of environment you control. That's sort of more of a spiritual haven. Outside, finding God on the street is a very interesting concept. We're going to have to address that. So verse 2. I arise now and go about the city, in the marketplaces and in the city squares. I will seek him whom my soul loves. You want to find God? You find him outside. That's a very strange concept. It's actually going to reappear, I believe, in chapter 8. And Se'echa bachutz, I find you outside. So that's one of the themes we're going to address. We're also going to address who are the guards. We're also going to address what does it mean that you find God as soon as you turn away from the guards. And then what does it mean that when you find God, you bring him to your mother's house? Okay, so that's, we have our work cut out for ourselves. Okay, so let's begin. We'll leave the outside alone for a second. We'll skip that. Maybe we'll go back to it. On my bed at night, right? So we have the sin. Before was the sin. The sin causes a feeling of separation to God. So we are in spiritual nighttime. In spiritual nighttime, all of a sudden, the soul yearns for God. But it's very interesting. The translation here is not accurate. On my bed at night, I sought him whom my soul loves. Loves in the present tense. That's not what the verse says. The verse says all through these verses, from verse 1 to verse 4, it's always she'ohava nafshi, that which my soul loved, in the past tense. Now you could say it's past, but it's continuous. You could say, on my bed at night, I sought him whom my soul loved. I also happen to love him now, but I loved him in the past. But the precise reading is, on my bed at night, I sought him whom my soul loved, past tense. In the Kabbalistic interpretation, this is very beautiful, because when did the soul experience the love to God? In the past. In the past, in other words, the full intensity of love of God, in the past, before the soul descends into the body. So when the soul is lying in spiritual darkness at night, in the body, in the physical realm, it seeks for God. But could it say it's in love with God? Not really, not in the same level as it was in the past. So what's happening for the soul is yearning to re-experience the feeling it had in the past. And that's why all from now till verse 4, it keeps saying, that which my soul loved. because it had experienced, the soul remembers that it experienced a love in the past, but it doesn't feel that same intensity. That's why that's darkness. That's lying in bed. That's in spiritual darkness. Lying in bed, the Kabbalah explains that when you, not about this verse, but in general, lying in bed, it means that when a person is standing tall, the head is on top, and then goes the heart, then goes the feet. When a person's lying horizontally, that means the mind and heart are not functioning in a proper way. The mind is not controlling your body. There's no hierarchy of wisdom and then emotion and then action. So in other words, the mind is not in control of the person. That's spiritual sleep. That's spiritual darkness. So when our soul is lying in bed, in other words, when the soul comes into the conscious mind, the physical body, at this point, it doesn't feel the intensity of the love, but it seeks that experience. It says, "Oh, I remember that I used to love. I want to recreate that feeling." Okay, so she gets up and she searches in the city, in the marketplaces, in the city squares. She can't find that's which her soul loves, until they run into the watchman. The watchman who patrolled the city found me. Have you seen him whom my soul loves? And here we have the issue: who are the watchmen? And the watchman, in the Kabbalistic interpretation, it shifts, because according to the Medrash, and it's quoted in Tanya and other places, but it's based on the Medrash, Avos de Rabbi Nassan, a body is like a city. In other words, just like we think about a city has it's a full organism. In a sense, a city is an organism. You have all the different people of the city and all the functions of the city all working together to create one organism. And a body is the same idea. The body is the same idea. You have all different parts of the body creating one collective whole. So the city, the Medrash says, a city is a ir ktana. A city is a body is a small city. That's the metaphor in Tanya, where you have the godly soul and the animal soul battling for control over the body. Is the metaphor in Tanya chapter 9 is that there are two kings battling over control of the same city. Okay, so the city is the body. If the city is the body, who are the guards of the body? Well, what are the guards? The guards stand at the entrance and they regulate who comes in and who comes out. So in the spiritual sense, in other words, in the sense of the person himself, who are the guards? Who controls the body? Right? The woman is the soul. The city is the body. She is looking for God. She's trying to experience God. Who's in charge of what experiences are allowed in the city? It's the guards. Who are the guards? The guards is the eyes and the heart, because the eyes represent the interface between the body, between the mind, and taking in stimuli from the world outside of you. So now, here the point is, because the human eye, and therefore the human heart, because the human heart follows the human eye, like we say in the Shema, don't stray after your heart and your eyes. So the sages say they're both related. If you stray after your eyes, your heart will stray as well. So the point here is, because the soul is inundated with physical and temptation and stimuli, that does not allow it to experience God, because it's being distracted by the guards. It's being distracted by the physical stimuli that's running in from the eyes to the heart. So as long as the guards are there, you're not going to find God. But there's a positive end. I had just passed them by. Soon as you pass by those guards for 1 second, if you can get a little break, right? If you could put a stop to the guards, if you can pull yourself away from the guards for even a short moment, you're going to bump into the person who your soul loves. In other words, if you could turn yourself away from the physical temptation, even for a moment, you're going to have a spiritual experience. That's what happened. I had just passed them by when I found him whom my soul loves. So that's what Rabbi Shneur Zalman says. If you could stop the connection, even momentarily, from the physical stimuli, you will be able to have a spiritual experience and you'll be able to see God. However, seeking God, finding God will be a momentary experience, unless you could do something that would make what we would call a vessel to allow that the experience of closeness to God and the love for God should continue. Because you could close your eyes for a second, But ultimately, you're going to have to open up your eyes again. In other words, ultimately, the guards are back. So the question becomes, how do you maintain the love to God, that you found God? How do you maintain that? How do you maintain that despite the fact that the guards are going to be back in a moment? And the answer is, you have to bring God, you have to grasp him and not let him go. And you have to bring God back to the place of my mother's home, your mother's home, and the place where one was conceived. And the sages explain, I don't have the exact reference, but the sages explain that these two expressions, the place of my mother, the home of my mother is the written Torah, and the home of she who conceived me is the oral Torah. I don't remember exactly. I would think father and mother is written Torah and oral Torah, because just like the mother expands the seed that she gets from the father, and the expansion of the seed creates the child. So the written Torah is sort of the seed, the kernel of the idea, and the oral Torah is the expansion. So that's what I would think. But apparently, I'm not finding the exact source. But it's clear that that according to the sages, this would be a reference to the Torah. In other words, I don't love God because I'm too sort of too overwhelmed by the physical experience and physical temptation. So I don't feel close to God. But if I turn away from that physical experience, even for a moment, I just turn away from the guards, and you will chance upon the person who you so loves. All of a sudden, you'll feel closeness to God. You'll feel close to God. But the key here is not to let that experience dissipate, to have that experience of love of God continue. And the only way you do it is if you bring him back to your home, if you study Torah. Torah is the vessel for that otherwise fleeting feeling of connection to God, which can happen for a second. But how do you maintain that love to God? For that, you have to make a vessel. You have to bring God into your life. And that, according to the sages, is the study of the Torah. So that's the big idea. And that's how Rabbi Shneur Zalman explains these verses. I only have to, if anybody has any comments or questions, please share, because there's one more detail that I have to address. And that is, what is the meaning that you find God outside, right? Outside is where the guards are, especially according to what we're reading it now, the guards are negative. You would expect you find God in the home, which is a place of, like we said last week, it's a place of the domain of the singular. It's a place of more holy than the street. So Rabbi Shneur Zalman has a beautiful interpretation, and he asks, why did the soul come into the body? Why does God put the soul through the situation where? Why does God put the soul through a situation where there's so much temptation and negativity, and it's very difficult to recreate the love that it had? And the Alter Rebbe's explanation is based on what we always say, that we have Memale and Soivev, you have the limited light in the creation, and that's what the soul grasps, and that's what the soul grasped before it came into the body. And then there's the encompassing light, Sovev, the encompassing light of God, and that's much more great, much more powerful. And that the soul can only access in this physical world. How so? So to access the encompassing light, you have to trigger the will, a person's deep will, ratzon, will. Because will, according to the Kabbalah, is encompassing. Every other faculty of the soul has a specific place where it dwells. Your eyes and the mind, the understanding in the brain, the feeling in the heart, etc., etc. The will represents, it's not necessarily in one place. The will hovers above you entirely. That's what the Kabbalah explains. And therefore, Keter, the crown, is will and pleasure, but we're going to focus on will right now. So ironically, the place where you can awaken a will to God, in other words, a deep desire, you could understand God better in heaven. You could love God better in heaven. But where do you want God more? Outside. And that's the theme that keeps reappearing. The distance creates the will. And the will elicits the level of Soivev, the level of the encompassing light, which we would never have if our soul is in the Garden of Eden in heaven. Because in heaven, we understand God. We feel connection to God. But that's all the level of Mamale. That's the limited ray of God that we could assimilate within ourselves and comprehend and understand. But when do we get to the essence of God? Only through the will, when we want God, that's where we can get his essence. We can't understand his essence. We can't feel his essence, but we could want his essence. And the wanting and the lacking and the wanting comes from yearning, which comes from distance, which comes from the outside. That's why, ironically, where does the soul find God? Where does the soul seek God? b'shvakim u'rechavot, in the streets and in the streets and the marketplaces, because that's where the will is awakened. In heaven, you love God, you understand God, but you don't have that longing and that will and that power. And that's a theme, as we said last week, and we're going to say many times again, that's a recurring theme. But this idea that when you study when you turn away from the guards, and you find a moment, and you would, and as soon as you turn away from God, you turn away from the physical pursuit and the physical pleasure, and you open up some space within yourself, boom, you're going to bump into the person who you so loved. You're going to bump into the love of God. And now it's your job. If you do nothing, it's going to flee, right? That's why she has to grab onto him. Where's he running? He's not running anywhere. It means, in the way it's explained Kabbalistically, God is everywhere. The question is, are we present? When God will run away really means that he's leaving our consciousness. But why is he fleeing from our consciousness? Because there's competition, because the eyes keep bringing in new stimuli from the physical world around us. So if you want that moment of meeting with God, where you feel connected to God, if you want that to last, you have to make what Kabbalah would call a vessel. You have to make him a vessel to contain it. You have to have a container. And because otherwise the feeling is fleeting. And the container is the study of Torah. When we study Torah, we are grounding the feeling of love to God. That's bringing him to our mother's home. Why is the Torah our mother? Maybe because God is our father. Maybe that's what it is. So that's the story in short, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining. And I'm looking forward to continuing next time we meet about the actual, we're going to move closer to the wedding. Now, wedding has two parts. Wedding, first, the bride has to come to the wedding, and then the groom has to come to the wedding. And that's exactly what we have in chapter 3. Chapter 3, you're going to say, everyone says, who's the bride coming, right? We continue. Mizot, verse 6. Who is this coming up from the desert, like columns of smoke, perfumed with myrrh and frankincense, of all the powder of the peddler? Who's this? Who's the bride coming to Jerusalem from the deserts? And then now that we have the bride, then we move to who's the groom? Oh, here is Solomon. Behold the litter of Solomon, etc., as we read. And then eventually we get to the wedding, which most people say the wedding starts here and continues in chapter 4 and chapter 5. So we have a lot to look forward to and a lot to, and the wedding, as you know, is not the end of the story. The wedding is just the beginning of the story. The real drama is after the wedding. So we still can keep ourselves busy for a little while with the song. So
Rabbi, question?
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I missed a lot of this because my internet failed, but I was privileged to be in 3 of your classes this week, and it seems like the common theme here is that in contradistinction to the paradise and the high bar of Eden, we have Noah getting drunk off the boat. We have Akev talking about the heel more than the head. And we talk about now unrequited love, missing opportunities. So we're talking more like soap opera, existence, so that the bar is held very low in all 3 of these moments in our study. Now, is that so that we are given the opportunity to raise the world and have a different perspective on this? Or is there some other theme we're missing?
So I think that lowering the bar, I wouldn't say it's so much lowering the bar. I would say finding the opportunity in the challenge. So this world is soap opera. The world is one big soap opera. In other words, the world is full of disappointment, and the world is full of challenges. Now the question becomes, how do you view the challenge? So the conventional way of viewing the challenge from the Jewish perspective is that somehow or another, now we're in a time of darkness, and we're in time of exile, and now God is upset at us. And we all have the experience when someone who's in love with us is upset, when our mother doesn't want to talk to us. Well, that doesn't happen so much. When we don't want to talk to our mother, when our best friend is not talking to us, or our spouse is upset at us, we all have that experience. And and people view the last 2,000 years in that light. Where something is wrong, we're not the way we should be, we're not in love with God, we're not spiritually sensitive as we were in the temple. We're in a dark chapter of our history, and the same thing would be in our life when there are dark chapters in our own life, either personally or spiritually, either in other words between other people or within ourselves or between God. So this is the dark chapter. So the conventional interpretation is you have to get by the dark chapter. Your daughter comes home from school, she doesn't want to talk to you. Okay, fine. So hopefully in 2 hours she'll want to talk to you, right? So you have to get by it. It's a negative situation. You have to survive it. And hopefully, because we're optimistic, we believe that we'll overcome the negativity and we're going to get to the time where the love will be rekindled in the coming of Mashiach in the third temple. That's the conventional view of exile. That's the conventional view of challenge. And then here comes the Hasidic view. And that's conventional. That's Rashi's going to say it too. When you get to the exile, what's the function of the exile? Function of the exile is to mourn the fact and to learn the lesson, to suffer if you want to be negative. Some people even take this a little bit more negative. The purpose of the exile and the purpose of the darkness is that we learn the lesson. We suffer the consequence of failure, and that's how we learn not to fail again. And because we've been suffering for 2,000 years, next time when God brings us back to the temple, we're going to learn to behave, because we'll remember in our collective memory is if you misbehave, you get 2,000 years of exile, and that's something we don't want because we were traumatized. So that's the conventional interpretation. There's the darkness, you have to survive it. Comes the Kabbalah, and the Kabbalah is saying, listen, there's a spirituality to darkness, and if you want to sort of break this down, if you want to get to the core is that in some sense, in the darkness, you can reach the essence. And that's the big paradox. The paradox is that when everything is going well, you have a relationship with yourself, with your spouse, with your child, with God, everything is fine, but the level of connection is more superficial. It's not essential. And therefore, just like you have it, you could lose it because it's not the essence. Ironically, in the darkness, it's easier to access the essence. That is the Kabbalah's big idea. And that's how we understand everything in the world. That's how there's unity in the world. Because the whole idea of darkness, of negativity, of unholiness, sitra achra, the other side, call it what you want. All that is not an experience that is devoid of godliness. To the contrary, when a person is in the darkness, they have to know it's not just about surviving the darkness. It's using this experience to get to the essence. And if you want to say, what does it mean in our personal relationships or relationship with God? When there's darkness, when there's distance, the purpose is not to survive this fight and reconcile and go back to the way we were before. No, the purpose is that when we have the pain of separation, I could reach a deeper level of longing and love so that when we reconcile, it won't just be on a superficial level, but it will be the essential bond. So it's not that we're glorifying the darkness. Of course we want the light. Of course we want reconciliation. Of course we want the times of the temple. Of course we want the soul to feel connected to God. But what we're saying is to ignore the fact that there's an advantage to the distance. There's an advantage to the darkness where you can deepen the love and express the essential bonds and then bring that back to the relationship when you reconcile. And the goal is to have both. The goal is to have the light, but also the essence that you discovered in the darkness.
So is the real essence that even though we're yearning for the light, we're actually very happy in the darkness because we're closer to the essence? So is it really kind of desiring something we don't ever want to achieve?
I wouldn't say happy. I would say, I'm trying to look for a metaphor. I wouldn't say happy is not the right word.
Content?
Content is not either the right word.
Invigorated?
I would say connected, intimacy. In some sense, you're more connected to somebody. Okay, let me ask you a simple question. Are we more connected? My son is in camp. Am I more connected to my son every night when he comes home from school? And then when we're playing chess together? Or am I more connected when he's away for 8 weeks? And I really, really miss him and I'm in pain because I don't see him. So I'm asking you a question. Where am I more connected to him? So on one level, when you see him and you're playing chess together and you're studying Torah together and you're connecting, we're eating supper together, we're very much connected, right? And that's on some level. But on some level, and that's more enjoyable. So the question is, where are we enjoyable? That's much more enjoyable. Then your child goes off to camp or goes off to school or goes off to marriage or whatever the case is, gets onto a flight and goes to Australia. So now there's distance. But now all of a sudden you have a deeper yearning. So now the question is, which is more enjoyable? It's clear when they were in your house is more enjoyable. Where are you more connected? Maybe, perhaps, and that's the Kabbalistic answer, perhaps maybe you're more connected during exile. Now the purpose is not to have separation, but the purpose is when your child comes home, now you appreciate your bond with the child, not just because it was enjoyable before they left, because now that feeling of yearning that you had during the separation, that now you sense that also when he's back. And then when the child comes back, you have both the pleasure and the deep bond that you experienced when you had that yearning. God forbid somebody gets sick. Okay, so all of a sudden, you value life much more. You value your loved ones much more. Is the purpose to be sick? No, the purpose is to become healthy again. But that's not the purpose to become healthy again. The purpose is that when you become healthy again and you enjoy life, you don't remain with the pleasure, but you also value the life. You also appreciate the life, which that is the experience that came from the darkness. But the purpose, so it's not a question of what's better, light or darkness. Each one has an advantage. What we're trying to get is the wholesome Hashem Echad, right? One day, there's the evening and there's the morning, and one day, ultimately, the real oneness comes from experiencing both the light and the darkness. And in our relationship with God, the real oneness comes both from the times that we do a mitzvah and we're close to God, and the time that we feel distant and we're yearning. And historically, the real oneness comes both when we're in the temple and when we're in exile. But the purpose is not to say the exile is better or the temple is better. The purpose ultimately is to bring the yearning of the exile and the feeling of closeness, the deeper sense of closeness that you experience through exile, and bring that back to the table when you come back. And now it's not just pleasurable, but it's also it's also very deep.
But do you need both? You see your son and you don't see your son. That analogy holds because you've tasted both. For the last 2,000 years, we've really just been in the darkness. So is it essential that we see the light to appreciate the darkness, or are we just, the hope of a light will be enough?
Now, I will give you two answers. I would say that historically, collectively, in our collective consciousness, the fact that the Jewish people felt close to God in the temple is part of our collective experience.
Okay.
One answer. But I would also answer on a personal level, every individual has moments of closeness to God and moments of separation, right? Sometimes you're studying Torah, sometimes you're celebrating the holiday, you go to Shalom Yom Kippur, whatever the case is. It could just be in a random day, you're doing a mitzvah. There are times we feel closeness to God. And then there are times of distance. We feel either physical pain or spiritual pain, or we feel disconnected, or we feel that we're getting involved in negativity. We each feel the moment of separation and darkness. Now the question is, what do I do with this? Is this something I just have to survive and get by? Or the purpose here is, what's the purpose why is she lying in bed at night? Why does the guy abandon her? Because he's playing hard to get. Why is he playing hard to get? Because he's allowing, in other words, the moment of darkness allows here's the paradox of the song. During the day, when she could have looked for him and it would be much easier to look for him, she doesn't look for him. She actually tells him, go take a hike. Okay? When it's dark at night, the darkness motivates the search. So going back to the simple story, it's basically every romantic book ever written is basically the Song of the Songs. That when everything was fine, you were missing something. When there's darkness, when there's separation, you come to a deeper understanding of yourself and of your love. And it's true spiritually as well. So that's the paradox. During the day, he's here. The light is here. She's not as interested as she is when it's dark. Darkness is a time to find the essence of yourself and find the essence of the love and connection to God. The purpose is not to remain dark. The purpose is to get back together, to come to the wedding. But before the wedding, there's the roller coaster, there's the ups and downs. And after the wedding, there's also a roller coaster, but that's for another story. That's for another time. But we see what we're trying to do here. We're trying to explain that there's an advantage to light, there's an advantage to darkness. It's not about surviving the darkness. It's about mining from the darkness, the deep experience that you get and the deep yearning that you get, and bringing that back to the time of intimacy. So in my own life, when I feel distant, that's an opportunity to serve for yearning. And that yearning now motivates also the time when I'm close.
You sound like Viktor Frankl. Beautiful response.
Thank you. Thank you. Toda rabba. Have a wonderful Shabbos, everybody.
Shabbat shalom. See you Sunday.
Yes, God willing. Yes.
Shabbos. Thank you so much. This was great again. Wonderful.